I really appreciate that for a second time during my tenure as the lay minister, that Shawn has agreed to share. And in sharing, there's a vulnerability of who we are. We share ourselves as a person, and I appreciate that. Those of you who were here last week had a chance to hear Tessie and her personal journey of her values and how the influence of democracy, totalitarian governments, Catholicism, and everything brought her roots, were her roots, to bring her to this congregation. Shawn is going to share from his journey. That truly is a road not taken by many, but actually a core part of our beginning. The ritual that I've asked him to share at the end will be an abbreviated version. We can't do the whole thing today. It may be foreign to you, but I want you to think of aspects of it that you hear that connect to us. The theologian Richard Rohr said, the first Bible that was written was the Bible of nature. And although written Bibles we can argue about and go back and forth, nature is self-explanatory. And if we go back to that first Bible, it grounds us. Shawn, welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. So, some of you were here back in June, some were not. Back in June, I gave a speech regarding how I came to be where I am today as a proud, openly gay man who is also a pagan and a Wiccan. I did not really go into detail as to why I specifically chose Wicca. I just gave my general life course, how I was a devout Christian in high school, and why I left Christianity, and then how I found Wicca and Unitarian Universalism. Now I will go a little bit into further in depth as to specifically why Wicca specifically. I, in the past, have said very openly that, and I still do, that I'm a Wiccan, a pagan, a witch, and a polytheist. Many terms may be very misunderstood or may sound very similar, so I will just briefly sort out what each of these words means because they are each a very important part of who I am and my beliefs. Wicca is a neo-pagan religion, meaning it has roots in old pagan practices, but it's brought into a modern form. And Wicca was debatably originally created in the 1950s by a man named Gardner, or some say he simply brought it to light after witchcraft was legalized in the United Kingdom. Wicca is a witchcraft-based religion / spiritual path. However, don't let that scare you. I know witchcraft is a loaded term that is often seen with animosity, but in Wicca, witch does not mean bad. It simply means one who has an understanding of nature and a connection to it, one who can harness its power in order to get what one wants in this life. And that's where we get into the term witch. Witchcraft is not a religion. It is a practice that is found in many different religions and spiritual paths, such as Wicca, such as Voodoo, such as Santeria, and so on and so forth. There's many different types of witchcraft, some good, some bad, depends on who you ask. But I identify as a witch because witchcraft is a very inherent part to Wicca for me. And I also identify as a pagan. The term pagan, that's a very generic term that a lot of people don't seem to really understand what it truly means. Pagan is an old term from Roman times, and it was a term used to describe to rural folk, to country bumpkins, as you could say. The people that were not as enthusiastic about this thing called Christianity that was spreading across Europe. So they used the term pagan to refer to these people. In modern day, back then it used to be a derogatory term, but in modern day times, many people have reclaimed the term in order to say that they have beliefs that are in pre-Christian, pre-Islamic beliefs found in Europe, and Middle East, and so on and so forth. Many people also say any non-Abrahamic faith is pagan. Some will disagree. In my opinion, pagan is just a term that many people use in order to feel a sense of empowerment, specifically beliefs from pre-Christian Europe, pre-Muslim Middle East and North Africa, and so on and so forth. And now the last term that I will explain that's very core to myself is polytheism or a polytheist. Many pagans identify as polytheistic, like myself, but many identify as pantheistic, that everything is connected. I identify as a polytheist for my own reasons, but I just see many gods and goddesses as being separate entities. I do believe we all live in an interconnected web, per se, but I do believe these entities are different and distinct. So now that I explain these terms, that's how I identify. Now specifically about Wicca, why did I choose Wicca? Funny enough, this is, many of you may find this funny, but I actually first heard about Wicca when I was in elementary school from a Scooby-Doo movie called The Witch's Ghost. And shockingly, that representation of Wicca was positive, even though Wicca is not often portrayed as positive in mainstream media, especially not back then. However, there was many things that the movie got incorrect about Wicca, but that's okay. What can you ask from a Scooby-Doo movie? I mean, really. But but for a long time, I didn't really pay attention to Wicca. I grew up in a very non-religious household. When I was older, I did, on my own accord, go to a Christian church, and I said back in June about all that. But eventually, after leaving Christianity, I said, I've always had this interest in Wicca, and I'm going to explore that, and that's how I got on my path to where I am now. But besides about hearing about it from Scooby-Doo, there were several things that drew me to Wicca specifically. One, it lacks moral rules. There is no holy book in Wicca. There are many books that we read, to learn about spells and stuff like that, but there is no holy scripture. The closest thing to a Bible or a Quran or a Torah that Wicca has is the Wiccan Rede, and it is a very short document, and it mainly just describes the spiritual beliefs and practices very generically about Wicca. However, the only line of morality it really discusses is do what thou wants as long as thou do not harm others. That line can also be said many other different ways. There's different versions of the Wiccan Rede, but basically do what you want with your life as long as you're not harming others. And that is really the only moral line in that document. But that's one of the main reasons I was drawn to Wicca was its lack of strict rules. Because growing up in the South, in the Bible Belt, and being very familiar with a very fundamentalist variety of Christianity, I was looking for something with less rules, something that was more flexible that I could apply to myself. That is also something very interesting about Wicca, is that it's a very individualistic religion. One Wiccan may tell you that they believe very differently from another Wiccan. And in fact, in Wicca, belief is not the main focus. It's more about practice. There are common beliefs that many Wiccans have and share, but that is not the main focus. The main focus is practice, a form of witchcraft. So I like it because of flexibility, lack of moral rules, no holy book, all of that. But just to explain to you some very basics about Wicca before I go into today's ritual. So some very core things that most Wiccans believe in, not all. Like I'm just using very generic language here. I don't want to piss anyone off. So these are just things that most Wiccans believe in or recognize. In Wicca, there is usually a main goddess and a main god. Usually the goddess is portrayed or called a triple goddess, and the main god is called a horned god. Sometimes he is called the sun god. Some people will tell you that these terms themselves refer to specific deities, and some will tell you that these terms refer to different archetypes that can apply to many different gods and goddesses from different pantheons. For example, some will tell you that the goddess is Brigid or Morrigan or Hecate, and that the god is Cernunnos or Pan, and so on and so forth. So there is no actually commonality as to exactly who these two deities are. For me, they're just the triple goddess and horned god. I just recognize them as such. One of the other main things about Wicca is a recognition of the 8 Sabbats, or basically our 8 holidays, which include Samhain, which is coming up. Many of you now call it Halloween. And the one after that would be Yule, which is very similar to Christmas in many ways. And then there's Imbolc, there is Ostara, there is Litha, also known as Midsummer Solstice. There is Lammas, also known as Lunasa, and there is also Mabon. So 8 Sabbats, And the Wiccans all recognize these 8 habits, and usually they represent a transitioning of the goddess throughout the year, because she's called the triple goddess for a reason. 3 aspects to her: maiden, mother, and crone. And Wiccans believe that she goes through this process every year in accordance with the seasons. So in the fall time, she is an old crone. In the springtime, she is a young maiden. So those are some of the main beliefs about Wicca. And now you're probably asking, how did I end up at a Unitarian Universalist church if I am a very spooky witch? Well, I found, when I first found the Unitarian Universalist church, I was really drawn in, I know this may sound silly, but by the rainbow flags. You know, as a gay man, that was like, ooh, rainbow flags, that's a good thing. So, and I really, truly appreciate Unitarian Universalism because it allows you to have a free and responsible search for wisdom and truth, whatever that means to you. And they also have 6 sources and 7 principles, which I can appreciate, and I think they're overall very good, and I don't have to read a whole book like a Bible, so that's nice. Just 7 principles and 6 sources, very simple and very nice. So I often come here to learn about different spiritualities, or just come here to hear other people's experiences, and that's how I found my way into Unitarian Universalism. So yes, I may identify as a Wiccan, pagan, witch, and a polytheist, but I also proudly identify as a Unitarian Universalist.